continue our kind of Old Testament study of some interesting and inspiring people. And it's sort of the theme here this morning is courage. So, so I gave you a photograph or a copy of a photograph.
I thought this was Hurdle. I was going to take advantage of it.
Hurdle? Oh. No. You know what it is? Hold on just a second. Everybody take a look if you haven't had a chance. We're all old enough to remember this. Everybody have a feeling for what it is? A picture of? What is it a picture of, Don?
He was jumping in the ground.
Yes.
He had courage to stand up and stop.
Exactly. This is a picture, it's an infamous, iconic picture of the Tiananmen Square massacre in 1989. And uncounted numbers of Chinese students were murdered by the government and the military for their protests over the communist regime and the Chinese government. On the day after the massacre, when army tanks were, what you see here is what, there are 4 or 5 army tanks. If you saw an expanded picture of it, you would see an endless line of army tanks and troops all coming into Beijing, to Tiananmen Square, and they were just clearing everything out. They had killed people and murdered people, and it was a massacre. And then all of a sudden, here's a man with a couple of shopping bags, stands in front of this army tank and stops the whole column. Now, understanding a little bit about that Chinese regime, it would have seemed almost reasonable that they would have said, send the tanks right over them, as they were not interested in dialoguing with students or any of the people who were protesting. They just wanted to quiet them and kill them. So this man's act is simple. He's not a soldier. He looks like he's just been out shopping to me. And he just stands there with bags in front of the tank. That to me is either utterly crazy and stupid or incredibly courageous. What it did, that one man, remember, if you can still remember, you know how long ago that was? 1989? That's a long time ago, 25 years ago more. And that picture, we still recognize that picture? Maybe we don't remember all the details, but remember that man who stood in front of that line of army tanks? That picture has been an iconic symbol of people who stand up to dictatorships and communist regimes and authoritarianism and totalitarianism and has encouraged people throughout the world to take a stand. In this case, he was blessed in that he didn't get run over or killed right on the spot. But still, it's an act of courage that I think most of us admire and wonder whether we would have had the courage to do the same. I'm not so sure I would have. To be honest, I just don't know. But it's an interesting photograph. It's 25 plus years, and we still don't, young people don't know anything about it. What their courage, you know where their heroes are. Their heroes are at the Olympics. And there are some heroic things at the Olympics, but they're not heroes. The heroes are the people who put their life on the line for what they believe in. This week I'd like to look in 2 Samuel chapter 20 at a woman who is not named. We only know her as the wise woman of Abel Beth Makkah. Abel Beth Makkah is a city. Let me tell you a little bit about this city, where it is, first of all, because it's kind of neat to know where these places actually are. There's actually an archaeological record of this city, and they found it. What's unique about this city, if you kind of get a feel, there's the Dead Sea the Jordan River goes up to the Sea of Galilee, and the Jordan River continues up the hill, so to speak. And this Abel Beth Makkah is right at the very outskirts of the whole Hebrew territory. It's a border town, and was subject to attacks frequently, apparently. And so what the people did there is they decided that a single-walled city wasn't going to happen, and so they had constructed two walls around the city, which is quite unusual. So you had this one massive wall. If that wall, outer wall, was breached, you still had the inner wall as protection. Would the army attacking get weary of breaching two walls? That's what they hoped. Didn't always work that way. But can you imagine Donald Trump's pleasure with a double-walled city? He'd be tickled with that. And spare no expense, put up another wall. It only cost $27 billion. But anyway, it's a very interesting thing. It is a border town, and because it's a border town, there are a lot of cross-cultural exchanges. There are a lot of tensions with non-Hebrew neighbors. There are always in the process of being sensitive to, is a neighboring country or city-state going to attack us? If they do, even if they do, one of the reasons why it's a double-walled city is because it's so far away from Jerusalem and the seat of the nation that getting word to David, who was king at the time, and getting a military relief was probably too late. And so they're sort of on their own. They don't have, the city does not have its own standing army. It doesn't have any real defense other than this double wall, which seems to suit. So as we look at chapter 20, or even before we get there, on the questions, I ask, because this is about a wise woman, and since you're all ladies here, I'm gonna play to our strength. Do you think women would do a better job of waging war and peace than men, historically? Do you think you could have done a better job at it? What's that?
Definitely not.
Definitely not? Why do you say that?
Well, because I think that they're more capable.
You think they're more capable?
No.
Okay.
Maybe peace.
I don't agree with that. I think there are some...
Peace, but not the war.
What's that?
I said maybe peace, but not the war.
I see.
I think men are
Careful now, I'm the only man here, so
I know, you stand up against it. But I think they're they're poured into them. God made them unique in handling situations like women. I think I have a place, I have a woman's job, and then I think there's a men's job.
Okay.
And I think there's a men's job.
Okay.
The Lord has used one jail
Of course.
at times, and she was a judge. She was a judge. We never went to it. This
Yeah.
jail did
Yeah.
assist with them.
There are actually, as the biblical record demonstrates, this time period of 2 Samuel 20, David has ascended to the throne. A little background. He's ascended to the throne. He has suffered through hiding from Saul prior to that, but when he ascends the throne, it's almost immediately he has problems. And of course, his son Absalom rebels against him. And eventually, his son Absalom is killed, is beheaded after his head gets stuck in a tree. But so he's not had it's not been a real pleasant road for King David, as much as we think about him. His rule is a catastrophe. It really is. he does this one stupid thing, because we're introduced, one of the chief players in chapter 20 is a military commander by the name of Joab. Now Joab was the guy that pursued Absalom and found him hanging from a tree, cut his head from his body, and took it back to David, despite the fact that David had said specifically, absolutely do not kill him. So, curiously, David makes another piece of poor judgment subsequently. It's lots of poor judgment here. He says to Joab, guess what? You're demoted. Luckily, he didn't just kill Joab outright. And he gives the commander-in-chief of all his armies to a man called Amasa, who curiously was commander-in-chief of Absalom's army. Why would you do that? Do you understand? I don't get it. And it almost is destroyed by Amasa when it looks like he's kind of still playing around in his loyalty. But preceding the monarchy, and even the early stages of the monarchy, women were not so unusually found in places of authority. And that's who this woman is in Abel Beth Makkah. I hope that's how I say it. She seems to be accepted and respected in her city and beyond. It seems to be well known, has a reputation. We find that there are other, I won't go into the details of others, but this is really a fascinating thing to me. Let me get back to chapter 20 here. Anyway, let me read it here. Just to begin in verse 1. And there happened to be there a man of Belial, whose name was Sheba, the son of Bichri, a Benjamite, and he blew a trumpet and said, we have no part in David, neither have we an inheritance in the son of Jesse. Every man to his tents, O Israel. He's leading an insurrection. Insurrections are not looked fondly upon. We saw that in the picture of a man holding the bags in front of the tanks. May not have necessarily been an insurrectionist per se, but he was rebelling nevertheless. So every man of Israel went up from after David and followed Sheba the son of Bichri, but the men of Judah clave unto their king from Jordan even to Jerusalem. So there are two camps, and it happened pretty quickly. And so David came to his house at Jerusalem, and the king took the 10 women, his concubines, whom he had left to keep the house, and put them in ward and fed them, but went not into them. So they were shut up unto the day of their death, living in widowhood. You understand that those concubines were probably in all likelihood defiled by Absalom and his troops when David had to flee, and then as David's troops then were victorious, they moved back into the whole city, and as a kind of an insult beyond insults, his concubines were sexually assaulted, and so he didn't go into them at all. Then the king said to Amasa, assemble me the men of Judah within 3 days, and be thou here present. Now, this seems like a simple request. Now, I don't know exactly where he has to go to assemble his troops, but he's given them 3 days. 3 days, I want you guys to get your armies back together again. I want you to go after this Sheba guy and his bad guys. Because we're going to do them in once and for all, we're getting rid of them. We're not going to have any more to do with them. I'm done with all this revolution stuff. I'm all done with all this insurrection stuff. Get the army together. Now, I will say again, Amasa was the guy who headed up Absalom's army. I don't know if I want to trust the guy. I don't know what David's thinking, huh? Anyway, so Amasa went to assemble the men of Judah, but he tarried longer than the set time which had appointed him. Well, why did he do that? You kind of have to scratch your head and say, what's here, Amasa? Are you really with David or not? And David said to Abishai is the brother to Joel, all I'll be honest with you, I try to keep track of who was cousins and who weren't cousins and uncles and that sort of thing. But all the main principal commanders here are cousins. Abishai and Joab are brothers, and Sheba and Amasa are cousins. But it's all the family, it seems to be. Anyway, David said to Abishai, "Now shall Sheba the son of Bichri do us more harm than did Absalom? Take thou thy Lord's servants and pursue after him, lest he get fenced cities and escape us." David's not going to put up with this stuff, and so he's going to send the army out. And there went out after him Joab's men, and the Cherethites, and the Pelethites, and all the mighty men. And they went out of Jerusalem to pursue after Sheba the son of Bichri. And when they were at the great stone, which is Gibeon, Amasa went before them. And Joab's garment that he had put on was girded unto him, and upon it a girdle with a sword, fastened upon his loins in the sheath thereof. And as he went forth, he fell out. This would make a good made-for-movie TV drama. It really would. It's like, oh, Massa, he just got held up, maybe, who knows, maybe he didn't have parking meter change or something, who knows, but he's late. And Joab, I don't think, liked Amasa in the first place. I don't think he trusted him. I don't think he liked him. I think he was suspicious of him. And now he shows up late. And Joab, verse 9, said to Amasa, "Art thou in health, my brother? Wanted to know if he'd been sick." What's the matter? You got the flu or something? Where are you been? And Joab, now notice this, Joab took Amasa by the beard with the right hand to kiss him. But Amasa took no heed to the sword. This is such a violent story. I can't get my page. That was in the sword that was in Joab's hand, so he smote him therewith in the fifth rib, and shed out his bowels to the ground, and struck him not again, and he died. So Joab and Abishai, his brother, pursued after Sheba the son of Bichri. Oh, well, we got rid of Amasa now. I mean, there was not much of a conversation here, was it? Judgment had. Now, this is something I want you to notice about Joab, because it's important by the time we run into the wise woman. Joab is not the kind of guy you negotiate with. You don't negotiate with this guy. He's got his mind already made up. And if you're in his way, heaven have mercy. Verse 11, and one of Joab's men stood by him and said, "He that favoreth Joab, and he that is for David, let him go after Joab." And Amasa wallowed in blood in the midst of the highway. And when the man saw that all the people stood still, he removed Amasa out of the highway into the field and cast a cloth upon him. And when he saw that everyone that came by him stood still, and when he was removed out of the highway, all the people went on after Joab to pursue after Sheba. Well, that's one way to consolidate the army. You eliminate any potential threat, any potential insurrectionists, any conspiracy, any rebels, anything like that. So anyway, Sheba in verse 14 hightails it to this town called Abel. Abel Beth. And he hides out there. Well, Joab knows where he's gone and what he's doing. He's hiding out. And Sheba knows his future and destiny is done. He's a dead man walking. It's like a Steven Seagal movie. He's a dead man walking. There's almost no way he'll ever be able to escape Joab. He will never be able to negotiate with Joab. He will never be able to manage a peace treaty. There was nothing he's going to be able to do except accept his fate that he's going to die. It's a matter of how he's going to die. And this is the surprising part. For those of you who do the story, and many of you do, it's to me one of the more violent violent chapters of the scriptures on a personal basis, because we know the names of people who get killed. I mean, there are other places that say David went out and he killed his thousands and tens of thousands, but they're all nameless people. They say, okay, big deal, he killed his thousands and his thousands. That's great. But now you know the names of the guys who are dying and how they died. You know that Joab slipped his dagger out of his tunic and grabbed the guy's beard and split him open until all his guts fell out, and he died in the pile of blood and guts in the middle of the road. It's pretty violent. These are not peaceful times. So Joab decides he's going to go, in verse 15, besieged him at Abel Beth-Makkah, and they cast up a bank against the city. It was a ramp against that outer wall. It was a siege ramp is what it amounted to. And once they breached that first wall, then they could begin working on the inner wall. And anyway, the siege ramp, it stood in the trench, and all the people that were with Joab battered the wall to throw it down. Now they're on the inner wall, and they're trying to knock it down, and all of a sudden, you see, everybody in Abel Beth-Makkah knows their future too. It's wrapped up with Sheba. How Sheba goes is how the city goes. And verse 16. Now it gets interesting. I mean, the future here is dire. They have no capacity to wage war against Joab. The inner wall will soon be breached. And when that happens, they will be completely defenseless. The city will be wiped out for harboring an insurrectionist. Men, women, and children. That was the habit of the day. I mean, it's death to them all. Death to them all. They can throw rocks down on these guys or shoot them with pebbles, and maybe somebody's got a sword or two and a bow and arrow. But it's not that large a city to defend against the whole army of Joab. It's just not. So they're done. They're really done. Not only is Sheba done, but the whole city is done. I mean, it's done. And in verse 16, then cried a wise woman out of the city, Hear, hear, say, I pray you unto Joab, come near hither, that I may speak with thee. Now that's a pretty crazy thing for a man to have said. Let's negotiate. Let's talk about this. That's what she's saying. Whoa, slow down. You're obviously coming in. But can we talk about this? Can we negotiate this? Can we find some intermediate space where you don't have to kill us all? Well, Joab's got this head of steam built up. You ever seen those kind of guys? You just get the head of steam built up, and you best get out of the way. It's like a bull in a china shop. You don't want to get in the way. You're going to get run over. You're going to get hurt when you get run over. And there's just nothing you can do about it. It's just, you can't talk to them. You can't calm them down. If you've ever experienced that. Now, I've run into guys like this over and over and over again, not usually Christians, occasionally, however, but mostly non-Christians who are just, the sin is just welling up in them, and they're not even under their own control. They're making their own choices, but they're sinful choices, and they're sinful choices of utter violence. I'm not suggesting Joab is that kind of a guy, but he's got that attitude that I'm the chief. This is what we're doing. I don't negotiate. You know what I just did to Amasa? I'm going to do to you. That's what's going to happen here. We're going to kill you all. That's just the way it is. I don't know why Joab then all of a sudden, in verse 17, came near. I can see this wise woman who remains unnamed leaning out over the wall, keeping her head kind of low and saying, Yo, is Joab down there? And nobody seems to respond. And she says, Tell him to come over here. I got something to tell him. We've got a picture of what Joab is like. You think he's going to respond to a woman? I don't think he'd respond to a man. What is he going to say that's going to assuage Joab in the slightest. What's going to placate Joab to soften his anger, his vengeance against the city of Abel Beth-Maachah and Sheba? But this woman, I can't wait to meet her. This woman does something so bold. Now, the fact that she becomes the spokesperson for the city, not a man, but a woman, tells you there wasn't a man in the city as well respected for her wisdom, judgment, and astuteness as this woman. Or if there was, they were cowards and wouldn't stand on the wall and say, "Hey, Joe, come on over, I got something to say to you." This is a scary woman. There are a lot of scary women in the world. I've met some really scary women, but this woman is scary for all the right reasons. She is respected in her community. She is admired. She's a civic figure. She basically is an adjudicator of conflict. She's a great negotiator. We find out those things because what she's able to do with Joab. And she says when he comes over, he says, "Here I am." And then he says here, in verse 17, "Are you Joab?" Now I want you to get this little taste of flavor here, because this is beautiful. See, a woman can get away with this. A guy would just, couldn't pull this off. Your mothers and aunts and grandmas and that kind of thing, if you have nephews, nieces, grandchildren, children, have you ever found, our neighbors, have you ever found yourself in a position where you found these kids doing something that you told them not to do, or they're doing something they should have known better to do, and you're angry, and you finally have a talk to them, and you say, "Did you do that, Bobby?" and it's a rhetorical question, right? You know they did it, and you want to kill them, but you can't because it's not legal. You'll go to jail. But the wonderful thing about it is, in this case, I had a neighbor boy who had gotten a four-wheeler, and he drove, he knew better than this, and he had driven around my pond with his four-wheeler and made these, he found a wet spot, and he just made this mud bath, just running it all. It was terrible, it was awful. And I pride myself on mowing around the lawn, which is why, or the pond, which is why Marlo always yells at me because I'm always bush hogging around the pond with my lawnmower. But, and so I said, one of these days, I'm going to catch him. So one afternoon, sure enough, I hear him racing around in my pond. I run out there, and I wait for him to get around, and I stand in front of the mud bath. And I say, "Jesse, is that you?" It was mortifying, because he knew better. Well, maybe he didn't. But it was like, you're saying, "I can't believe that's you. Why would you do that? Is that you? That's not the Jesse I know. That's not the boy I know." Well, that's what she's saying here. It's dripping with sarcasm. That's not the Joab that I think I knew. And she explains why. It's a reproach. Your name doesn't suit you. And we find out later in another passage when he's mentioned with the mighty men of David, that means you're sitting in the seat of wisdom. A mighty man. That's what it means. You're sitting in a seat of wisdom. You're supposed to be wise, Joab. You are a father to Israel, she goes on to say here. A father to Israel? What does that mean? Yet you kill them. He's a leader in Israel. That's what it means. He's a point man. You look up to Joab. But you're supposed to be wise, but you're not acting wisely. Well, can you imagine saying that to a guy who's got a sword in his hand and thousands of guys behind him tearing your walls down, getting ready to kill you? Well, what do you got to lose, right? But this woman does. I mean, I admire this woman. Not only does she have courage, but she has brains, and she has wisdom, and she has ability to, not that's unusual, by the way, because women do, that's the way they're made. But she perceives accurately what she's going to have to do and say in order to have any hope at all. And so she says to him, you just don't act wisely. I don't understand. What's the matter with you? In Deuteronomy chapter 20, verse 10, this is why I say she uses her brains. I think she knows the law. And I think she knows the law well enough to know that before you attack a town, you try and negotiate peace. Job wasn't interested in that at all. You know the rules. You know the rules. You're supposed to negotiate. You're supposed to seek terms of peace before you attack and destroy a city and kill everyone. Unless God tells you. There were times when God told them. So he goes on, he says, he says back to her, well, excuse me, but who do you think you are? And she's like, I'm the spokesperson for a city that's peaceful and faithful to Jerusalem, to David, and you're attacking us. You're the father, then I'm the mother of Israel, and you're going to kill their children. This doesn't make any sense. So she's nailing him. She's nailing him. But somehow she negotiates with him. And notice this. Because she knows the edicts of the king, because she knows the law, because she knows that even though he's a military commander, he is bound to be obedient to the commands of the law and bound to be obedient to the edicts of David, she is wise enough to broker a compromise situation to save herself and her city. And so she says, wait, now look how beautiful this is. Oh, I think this is so wonderful. She knew. See, this is no flaky gal out there. This is a gal who invested herself in knowing what was the right thing to do. What was the law? What were the edicts of the king? Anyway, let's skip down a verse or two. In verse 21. Somehow she manages to negotiate to this point where Joab is actually listening. In the middle of the verse, and the woman said unto Joab, behold, Sheba's head shall be thrown to thee over the wall. Whoa! Because she knew the edict of the king is you have an insurrection, you behead them. That was what you did. The rebels, you catch them, you kill them, you chop their heads off. I won't even go to some places in Scripture where they chopped off hundreds and hundreds of insurrections' heads and piled them against the city where they all came from. You remember that? That's pretty gross. That's pretty violent. No, that's really violent. But it was typical. So she knew. Wow. But still now, to act on it would require the people in the city affirmation. And so in verse 22, the woman went unto the people in her wisdom, and they cut off the head of Sheba and threw it out to Joab. And the siege ended. The city was saved. Now this is really the last time you hear about this wise woman of Abel Beth Maachah, but it shouldn't be the last time we reflect on her, because she's such an amazing woman. She was smart, she was wise, she was proactive, she was a leader in her community. She emerged when there wasn't a man to stand up to Joab with any sort of intelligence, wisdom, or astutness. was able to negotiate with a man that does not negotiate. I mean, that's huge. How do you negotiate with somebody who doesn't want to negotiate? You go to war. She's trying to avoid it. I'm just amazed at this woman, and I hope you are too, as you're refreshed in your memory the story of this woman. Because there are so many amazing people. They're minor characters in the Old Testament. This woman, who doesn't even have a name, is a very small character in the grand scheme of the Old Testament record. But she is a major player and a major figure for what it means to be a person who does right, man or woman. I think sometimes, I'm going to add this as a PS, I think sometimes in our culture we have, you may not appreciate my leap here, but I'm going to say it anyway. I think we have in our culture over the last roughly 100 years, especially in the United States, especially among conservatives, and particularly so among Baptists, that we've sometimes relegated women to secondary or second-class roles without recognizing there are some extraordinary women whose voices need to be heard in the leadership of churches. We send them, ladies, overseas to be ministers and missionaries. They teach children in foreign lands. They do church. Why? Because there are no men who are willing to do it. No men who have been called but refuse to go. I think women, in many cases, have been taught you can serve in the nursery, serve in junior church, but you're not allowed to serve in other areas. I can say, well, Scripture's teaching is pretty clear. No, it's not. When we looked last week at Stephen and the beginning of the deacons, there's one woman who specifically is described by the use of the word deaconius, and that's Phoebe. So we know that there were women deacons. Does that mean there are women deacons today? Well, not in this church. I'm not advocating yet that we have women deacons yet. But you know, if this unnamed wise woman is recognized by God in Scripture and highlighted, that should give us something to think about, particularly as men and women, to recognize that God gifts women in ways in which are sometimes far superior to men, when men don't show up. And so something to ponder. But the woman is amazing, don't you think? I'm appreciative of her. And as Ed would say, I'm always stirring the pot just a little bit. You know, I don't mind stirring the pot because I'm not advocating necessarily for one thing or another, but it's stuff that we ought to think about. We ought to say, well, maybe I should revisit all this. Maybe I should look at what is a deacon in Scripture. Maybe I should just look at this a little harder. I broached this issue in my church at Geneseo once, and one of the other elders jumped up. He stood beside me with his fists clenched, and he said, "Don't you believe in the Bible?" And I said, "Oh, absolutely. I absolutely do." But I said, we've been taught this for so long that maybe we've missed a point or two. We ought to just chew. So I'm not necessarily advocating it. I'm just simply saying, hey, let's continue to dig in Scriptures. That's all. Be good students of the Word. And I would say, as a compliment to you, the ladies who are here, you are wise ladies, able to negotiate, especially those of you who've been married for any more than 46 years, 47 years. You should be good negotiators. So let me go in prayer. Father, thank you for this woman. Thank you for her example. Thank you for the model. Even though it doesn't say she necessarily trusts God, we are drawn to her because she's been obviously gifted with wisdom and intelligence, boldness, and courage. She, like the man who stands in front of the tank in Tiananmen Square, stands in front of a full advancing army about ready to destroy her city and kill all its inhabitants. She alone stands on the wall and says, wait a minute. Thank you for her. Thank you that we have the opportunity to ponder, to dig, to search, to study her and so many other people, to realize the fullness of what it is you call us men and women to. Thank you. We pray your blessing not only on our time, but on our worship service ahead, that you might stir in us and lead us in your way. In Jesus' name, amen.